right. Welcome back, everyone. Slightly longer than 5 minutes. Jeez. Okay. So, our bust belief debate tonight is titled The Future of Islam in the Age of Trump. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our speakers and our moderator. First up, in the theist corner, we have Asra Nomani, an accomplished author, instructor, activist, and intellectual. Asra has written and or been featured in the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Slate, Salon, People, NPR. So many publications. I can't name them all. She is the author of Standing Alone in Mecca, An American Woman's Struggle for the Soul of Islam, and Tantrika, Traveling the Road of Divine Love. Asra has been hailed by the New York Times for her Rosa Parks-style activism, standing up for women's rights to lead prayer in male-centric environments. She's also the mastermind behind the Pearl Project and founder of the Muslim Women's Freedom Tour. Asra, many of you don't know, also enjoys playing Magic the Gathering. And she's got a pretty strong blue-green deck, so for those of you interested, she'll crush you. Welcome, Asra. And in the secular corner, we have Faisal Saeed Al Mutar. Faisal is an Iraqi-born human rights activist. He is the president of the newly launched organization Ideas Beyond Borders. The mission of Ideas Beyond Borders is to promote the free exchange of ideas and defend human rights through education, building partnerships, research, and technology, to counter extremist narratives and authoritarian institutions. Faisal is a self-proclaimed satirist, computer geek, hummus enthusiast, and ladies, you can find him on Tinder. Welcome, Faisal. And now keeping the peace and moderating expertly, I guess emphasis on peace, is none other than Matt Dillahunty, who did a marvelous job at the last MythCon running the Robert Price-Bart Urban debate. As a former fundamentalist Christian, Matt is widely regarded as a wise man, speaking all across this great nation and internationally, moderating debates, and being an invaluable member of the secular world. Welcome, Matt.
So I stopped outside. I had to go from the front of the house back around here to the back, and there were 3 police officers out there. And I let them know that the contentious part of the day was over and that all we had left was a Muslim and an ex-Muslim, so everything would be fine. The format for this is going to be pretty simple. Asra's going to start with 10 minutes, and then Faisal will respond with 10 minutes, and then we're going to have about an hour of moderated discussion where I direct questions back and forth at them based on what I've heard, and they get to interact, and I will try to slip into the background to make sure that the people who actually know what the fuck they're talking about are the ones that are engaged up here. And as a side note, I apologize, I'm not going to be around this evening for the movie and other things. I actually have a flight to catch that leaves for London at 7:20. Oh my gosh, that sounds so much better.
I have a flight to Syria after this.
Syria? Yeah.
Oh, that's a joke. I'm not joining guys. I'm not joining guys.
London's good enough with me, although I'll be with Sam Harris, so I don't know if I'll be incredibly safe or incredibly in danger. So at about 10 to 5, when we end this discussion or so and start taking audience questions, I will be leaving. Don't think that you have necessarily run me off or whatever, or that I'm pissed, or I just have to go. So the last thing is, I don't even know that it needs to be said. Yes, I do. We're not really looking for jeering, cheering, applause, derision, heckling, or anything like that. We're here to talk about these ideas in facing and dealing with Islam in the age of Trump, etc. But it's interesting because I've had several conversations over the preceding months with both of these wonderful people, and I think that we might find both areas of agreement and disagreement, which might make this one of the more interesting debate discussions that I've participated in. So thank you all for your attendance, and a round of applause to begin with for Asra Nomani.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just gonna, there we go. Yes, put this. Thank you for having me. First, a handshake, because we are friends. Thank you for your moderation, and thank you all for inviting me and for making this a safe space for discussion. Yes, to all of you. For my explanation of my perspective, I want to take you back to a moment that was a deciding moment for me in the last election. It was the horror of the Orlando attack on the Pulse nightclub. You all know what happened. A young man went into this nightclub, and in the name of Islam, he slaughtered young men and women and those in between who he believed were criminals in the eyes of God, in the eyes of his faith. I watched in horror as a Muslim, because this is too often the bloodshed that I have seen and we have seen in the name of my faith for over a decade. I waited for the political response, and we received what we had been getting for the last 8 years from the Obama administration. Walking on eggshells, a refusal to acknowledge the Islam and Islamic extremism. From Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidate that I should have been supporting because she was a feminist like myself, because for every election before this last election, I had voted for a Democrat, we got a muted response. And from the new commander-in-chief, we received his usual subtleties. That we need to defeat Islamic radicalism. And that was the kind of straight talk that I, as a Muslim, want. That is the kind of straight talk that I, as a feminist, want, as I'm fighting interpretations of my religion that not only inspire a young man to go into a nightclub and kill dancers and party revelers, but also demand that women in the state of Iran cover their hair so that they can never feel the wind in their hair, or demand that an atheist blogger named Raif Badawi should be in jail because he decides to write against the government of Saudi Arabia. As a human being on this earth, as a humanist, I do not believe in the values of this extremist Islam. And I believe that everyone should be united without any sense of politics on the fundamental right that we've heard about over this morning and afternoon towards enlightenment, towards individual rights, towards humanity. Thank you. And so, over that summer, I reflected deeply about this presidential election that was everywhere in the headlines. I watched as Donald Trump then talked about this so-called Muslim ban. I listened as he wondered why the wife of the Gold Star family was silent as they spoke at the Democratic convention. And I continued to watch the complete muzzled response of the Democratic Party to Islamic extremism and issues of the crisis that we face with strict interpretations of Islam in the world today. So last November 8th, I did something I never did before. I cast my ballot for the Republican nominee for president. I am a Muslim, I am an immigrant, I am a feminist, I love my atheist brothers and sisters, and I cast my ballot for Donald Trump because I believed that the future of Islam and the future of Muslims is only going to be improved and brought to a place of enlightenment if we ask the hard questions. We have to honor Islam with the difficult questions or difficult tweets, as we've had to endure. We have to ask the difficult questions. And this is an audience that is all about the difficult questions. And so my argument is that we need to make atheism great again by refusing the political correctness that has put a stranglehold on conversations about Islam. And we need to make liberalism great again. Most importantly, we have to fight for liberal values if we do not want a Donald Trump in the office of the presidency. If you want him out, if you don't want a Republican winning in 2020, you better make sure that the Democratic Party cleans up its act. Right now, what it is doing is getting in bed with the far Muslim right. So what you have now is Bernie Sanders locked in arms with Linda Sarsour, a woman who said that Ayaan Hirsi Ali, an atheist, a feminist, a woman of color, should not have her vagina. And she has a part of it missing because of being the victim of female genital mutilation. What has happened to real liberal values? Justin Trudeau went to a mosque in Toronto. He went to the main hall and he spoke to the men who were assembled in this main hall. So can you just imagine for a minute being in this theater and the women are sent upstairs and he said, hello to the sisters upstairs. Well, I don't want to be a sister upstairs. And we shouldn't allow liberalism to be hijacked by this political correctness that is the death knell of not only America, but the West. Melissa talked earlier about how it is that we need to make it so that Western values are not a dirty word. And this is the truth. This is really true. We have to fight for an inspirational interpretation of Islam. And that is what I try to do every single day. Fight for a reform within my community that talks honestly about the problems that we face. And so Donald Trump, of course, he is not the answer to all, to say the least, right? But he is what will continue to be created, and it is, if the Democrats and the liberals refuse the honesty and critical thinking that is completely sucking the life out of the debate on Islamic extremism. We have to stand up for feminist values. We have to stand up for secular governance. We have to stand up for peace. And as long as you allow the Liberal Party, the Democratic Party, and liberals to continue to pull their punches on the tough questions within Islam, the future is dark. And so what I invite you to do is stand with moral courage with me and all the other Muslim reformers who are taking the risks that others have taken inside your own community to challenge conventional wisdom, to challenge the status quo. That is how we are connected, because you are the black sheep. I am the black sheep also in my community. And we know how to fight, sounds like, just like you guys. We know how to eat our own. And this is something that cannot happen for enlightened ideas to move forward in the world. We need to stand together for a future that is bright, that is honest, that has critical thinking. And in that way, I believe atheists and Muslim reformers can stand together. And we have, over this last year, the example of Donald Trump with all of his subtleties, again, as an inspiration. So thank you.
I think we should just stop here and declare Asha the winner, because it's the first time in history of moderating debate someone without a script and without a clear announcement from me finished it exactly 10 minutes. So.
Well,
the pressure is on, my friend.
I don't think I can achieve that. I'm an immigrant, so I don't follow the rules here. So, I mean, I came in with some preparation. I worked on them on the plane, but well, ladies and gentlemen, non-binary people, Sunni, Shias, and infidels, thank you for Milwaukee for inviting me. I would like to start with a quote that sometimes the enemy of my enemy is also my enemy and not my ally. We have been stuck in this mentality. The United States have done it before, of arming the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union. We've always looked at siding with bad allies, or not necessarily allies, in fighting against a bigger enemy. So we see that very clearly in many militias in the Middle East, in which you see many of those who are on the front lines of fighting ISIS, such as Iranian militias that are motivated by sectarianism, and Jabhat al-Nusra, which is al-Qaeda, that thinks ISIS is too extreme. Just imagine that for a second. Al-Qaeda thinks ISIS are too extreme. Like what the fuck, right? Sometimes we forget what we stand for because we are just focused on what we are against. We forget that the war against Islamist terrorism, which I agree on with Asra, of course, cannot be done with force alone. Bigotry, hatred, travel bans, and allying with a fascist state like Russia is not the way to do it. And the war against Islamist terrorism, it's more importantly a war of ideas. The United States and the West cannot bomb their way out of this. They cannot ban their way out of this. They cannot trump their way out of this. To win the battle of ideas, the West needs to have more than ever to stand for the values of liberal democracy, enlightenment, secularism, and universal human rights, which are encoded in the DNA of the American Constitution. And yes, tolerance. These are the values that make us more superior than those we are fighting. And let's not focus on just the enemy, and then in that way we lose our civil liberties, our freedom, and yes, destroy the environment, because Mr. Shiros in chief think that climate change is a Chinese conspiracy. So this is not a clash, and the way that he's framing it is a clash of civilizations, which I fundamentally disagree on. It's not a clash of civilizations. It's a clash between civilization and lack of it. It is a clash. It is a clash of the values of modernity versus the values of anti-modernity. It is a war against the global jihadist insurgency that all of us who believe in the values of enlightenment, whether we're from the West, whether from the East, whether we're from Copenhagen, Paris, or even our friend in Saudi Arabia, Raif Badawi, that I love and admire a lot. And we need more Muslim allies. Which brings me to my point that Trump's alienating language, I mean, I cannot impersonate Trump that much because he's very difficult, but like things like shutting down Muslims until we know what the hell is going on. Saying things like Muslims hate us, you know, they hate us, you know? And issuing bans on majority countries. Many of the 6 of these bans, at least in the recent one, are majority Muslim countries. That some of them and some of the people there are on the front lines of fighting extremism. Hiring and then firing the chief editor of Breitbart, which is one of the craziest media channels. I don't know, I call it media channels. It's more like a trolling website that is filled with generalizations against Muslims, against Arabs, all of that. And then Mr. Trump, who's supposedly the biggest enemy of Islamic extremism, ends up cozying up to Saudi Arabia, which is one of the most and the biggest exporters of Wahhabism ideology that is feeding groups like ISIS and others. And it's not surprising, he also happens to have businesses there. And that's and the alienation thing is very important. So when the first travel ban happened, that included Iraq. Now Iraq is kind of in the mix, but it also included people with the green cards. And then they removed that. I mean, talk about dysfunctional, right? And I had 2 flights. I had one to Canada and one to speak in Oxford. And talk about what? Counter-extremism. So I was affected by that. And my mom was in Iraq at the time. And I'm actually one of the most integrated immigrants you can ever find. I drink, I use Tinder. I have tons of American friends, the Americans who are on the board of my organization, and I felt alienated and I felt that this country kind of hates me. Imagine if the people who are not raised liberal or did not love America as much as I do. How about those who are half integrated, the ones who live in Dearborn and even here in Milwaukee, who were grown up by religiously conservative parents. And they would listen to the message of the president, and then a charming recruiter comes in, and then he tell them, you know what, guys, America hates you, we are the good guys here. And I mean, it's a case with one of our closest friends, Majid Nawaz, who grew up in a religious moderate family, and he was beaten up by British racists, and then eventually a guy from Hizb ut-Tahrir came in, which is an extremist organization that is like the Muslim Brotherhood, and tried to get him and telling him, like, see, it's a war between the West and the East, see what the president is saying, see what these guys are doing, and it's been used as a tool to recruit many Muslims to join extremist organizations. If you look at one of the most successful attempts in defeating ISIS, which is usually called AQI, the country I come from, al-Qaeda of Iraq, and the founder of it is Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, and the most successful attempt, which was led by General de Petraeus, is recruiting and working with Sunni Muslim tribal forces in West Baghdad and West Iraq, in which stopped many advances of ISIS. So alienating Muslims and not in this language is the last thing we want in this battle. And while we had like many people here talking about being triggered, right? I mean, we have a president who is a triggered in chief. What, right? Like, imagine, like, he is waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning, tweeting about Saturday Night Live. Okay? So maybe we'll make fun of Trigglypuff. I don't know if you know Trigglypuff. So we have a Trigglypuff with the biggest arsenal of nuclear weapons in the world. If that is not scary for you, then I don't know what is. And my last point is that about the differences between conservatives and liberals. And this is a quote from a friend of mine who is also a person of color. His name is Al-Rizvi, and he said, the right is wrong about Muslims and the left is wrong about Islam. The left is coming from a place of crazy multiculturalism and postmodernism, as Melissa have talked about, and the right is coming from a place of clash of civilizations, sometimes actually from religious conservatives who believe in other theocracy, which is Christian theocracy, opposing Islamic theocracy. And their hatred is not just against Muslims or people who look Muslim. I mean, since I spoke against the travel ban, I'm not stop hating. I mean, last night someone was shouting at me. And I got emails for breakfast, hate mail for breakfast. And even though I'm not a religious person. And if you look at books of like Ann Coulter and other basket of deplorables, you'll see that they are not just against Muslim. They're also opposed to Mexicans because they believe in many false theories of white genocide and the fact that America is kind of the Israel in which is set up for white Christian Protestants. And if you are not part of that, you are the enemy. So like the fact, that's why when I mentioned in the beginning that the enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my ally. And in fact, if you ask people like Mike Pence and Ted Cruz, who are from the Christian right, and you tell them like, oh, okay, what's wrong with society? What do you think is wrong with society? You'll see that many of their answers is all about, oh, we kicked God out of school, the women now are so promiscuous. And if you compare that and you do an interview with the Muslim Brotherhood, you actually find that they actually have a lot in common. All right? They may not be, I'm not saying that Mike Pence is Muslim Brotherhood, but what I'm saying is that they actually, religious conservatives from the Christian West have more in common with religious conservatives from the Muslim world. But they hate each other mainly on religious theocratic bullshit. So they may not be as aggressive as the Islamists or the Muslim Brotherhood, but at the same time, you'll see that their opposition to Islamic extremism does not actually come from the values that I was talking about, the values of enlightenment or secularism, universal human rights. It's actually coming from a theocracy opposed to another theocracy. And my last point on, how much time do I have? 1 minute, good. Oh, I'm not bad. Okay, so, I mean, even if Trump is right on Islamic extremism, which I don't think he is, but I don't consider myself, I'm not a citizen yet, but I'm gonna be soon, unless Trump deports me, is that I'm not a single issue voter, is that how much do we have to sacrifice from our civil liberties, our beliefs in science, our science funding, Planned Parenthood, being pro-choice, all of these things. How much do we need to sacrifice from our values for us to defeat Islamic extremism? And so, I mean, even he was right. I would not ever vote for him because he's wrong on almost everything else. So the fact is that he might be right in Islamic extremism, but doesn't mean we have to sacrifice all our beliefs, all our values that we hold dearly. And my last point is Russia is not our ally. And for him to cozy up to the fascist regime that is responsible for killing journalists, I mean, talking about free speech over here, right? Russia kills its dissidents, they kill its journalists. The opposition is, this is not a country that should be our allies. We should not forget our values and we should stand for them no matter what is the cost. Thank you very much.
Okay, I now have to call it a draw because that was 10 minutes also. You guys are good. Thanks. I think probably before I get to the massive list of questions that I've compiled, why don't we start this way? I'm going to start with Osman and see if there's something about what Faisal said that you feel compelled to address as maybe highlighting a different approach or a point like that.
Faisal, was there any recruitment by ISIS during the Obama administration?
Yes, I mean, he wasn't great either.
Did a few people get on a plane from the United States to Syria?
Yes.
Does President Obama more aptly reflect your values as a liberal? The whole breadth of values that you talked about, from climate change to abortion?
For the most part, yes.
Right. So your argument that recruitment is going to increase now because all of a sudden Islamic extremists have a reason to hate America is a timeless phenomena. They will hate us no matter what we do and who we elect to office. And so if we actually want to challenge Islamic extremism, we have to have a strategy that addresses it directly, unlike what President Obama was doing for the last 8 years. And so the idea, this is a common argument that's made when they wanted to have any kind of initiative that would promote Islam in America over the term of the Obama administration. They would say, if you don't do this, then the extremists will hate us and they will use this as a recruitment tool. They have every reason in the world to use America as a recruitment tool because their ideology hates America. And so I would say that that argument is one that is not one that we should decide. We should not make our decisions based on that argument, because ultimately we will always be moving the end line. We will always be caving then to the demands of organizations like the Council on American Islamic Relations and Linda Sarsour. That's the spectrum of institutional Islam that is dead set against Donald Trump's very clear position against Islamic extremism.
Can I respond?
Absolutely.
I mean, I agree with you. It is not about convincing Islamic extremists that they're not going to hate America. I'm talking about those who are on the sidelines, those who will be more sympathetic to Islamic extremism now as a result of Trump alienating language than they would have never before. So obviously, I mean, al-Qaeda would always. I'm not saying we should kiss Bin Laden, but what I'm saying is that we should. I'm talking about those who, let's say like when Charlie Hebdo attack happens. So there was the jihadists, right? There was the ones who went and killed. And then there are those who are like, well, but Charlie Hebdo brought it to itself. Then there are those who say, well, you can criticize everything, but you should not talk about Islam. So there is a spectrum of extremism. There is the religious conservatives, religious moderates, and there are those who are closer to jihadists. I'm talking about these people with Trump's alienating language will move more to like, okay, so Islamophobia and travel bans are happening. They're like, okay, I want some help. Where are they going to go? They're going to go to Center Islamic Relations. Well, they have never thought of doing that before. So now like Linda Sarsour and other people like her are able to recruit more people as a result of Trump alienating message of people being afraid of coming back to the country again. I mean, I have a dear friend from Iran who finished a master's at Boston University, now moved to Canada because she's afraid with what's going to happen with the Iranian passports. Another travel ban. So we lost an ally who could have been a great resource to this country. So like I'm talking about those who are not extremists at the moment. they listen to the recruiting, charming message of Linda Sarsour and people like her, and they're moving more to her direction than they're moving to American direction.
So the problem with that entire scenario is what you're ignoring is the fact that on the left and among liberals, it has become the political campaign of the hashtag resistance to completely make this the narrative that America is at war with Muslims. They have political advantage from doing this. Now, there may be some grounds for in the rhetoric that Donald Trump is putting forward for legitimate criticism of his approach and his style, but this has been the political campaign since November 8th. I came to Milwaukee shortly after the election, and I was out on the streets where, you know, the protesters of the resist movement were spitting on cops and putting their "not my president" hashtag out into the universe, so that then that catapulted Linda Sarsour and her conservative Islam into the forefront. The liberals locked arms with the Muslim right and have continued to empower them using Trump as an easy boogeyman, of course, but ultimately there's a politics that we have to recognize and dissect if we're going to actually take away that kind of alienation from America. This is happening beyond Islam in our country, leading to this division that I think is also very irresponsible on the part of the Democrats right now.
Yeah, I mean, if there's something we are in complete agreement on is the fact that the left is not helping. And I think now, as a result of Trump, unfortunately, they are doubling down on this issue.
Right.
And I mean, you could get articles on the Huffington Post saying that Islam is the most feminist religion, and they're trying to double down. I mean, they're now like double down apologists versus what they used to be apologists. And I completely agree with that. I mean, I think that the left is not helping. And yes, I mean, Bernie Sanders hired Linda Sarsour.
Exactly.
I mean, Hillary Clinton did many bad things in working with the Brotherhood people. I mean, I acknowledge these issues, but you also need to acknowledge that Trump alienating message is making it worse. So like now, so now people are, I mean, they're also following the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So like the left is also doing the same thing that you're doing, right? You're voted for Trump, siding with him against the left, and now the left is siding with the right, Muslim right, against Trump. So like they're also following, I mean, both sides in this debate are wrong. I mean, the left is not doing a good, they're doing a terrible job. I mean, good job is actually, a bad job is totally a compliment of what they're doing right now. But yeah, I mean, I think that both of these arguments can be true, is that Trump's alienating message is making it worse, and the left doubling down on Trump is making it worse for us, especially like both of us pretty much want to live in the same world, right? We want a secular world with human rights, all of these things. And I think both sides are making it worse for us.
Well, I reject the parallelism because I would argue that the sort of Chicken Little, description that you made about life after Trump is not the reality that we are saying today. We're not going to see a theocracy, a Christian theocracy in the White House. Sure, I don't support Mike Pence and that philosophy that he has of Christian interpretation of faith. But ultimately, I have faith in this country, and I have belief in this country that which you are spelling out as the worst case scenario in this country is not going to happen. And I think that, in fact, is just the propaganda and the rhetoric of the left right now that continues to divide our country.
So you
Go ahead, clap.
So you don't think that, like, I mean, Trump getting the ability to hire Supreme judges, deny climate change. I mean, the head of the science is a climate change denier. These are, and that some of it comes from religious perspective, some of it comes from pure stupidity. But at the same time, like, I mean, we only have one planet, right? If we have the United States damaging the environment and making laws that are pro-coal, anti-green, yes, Trump might have a lasting damage. I mean, obviously it's not going to be, I don't buy this rhetoric that America is going to be Nazi Germany and people are going to be put in concentration camps. But at the same time, it is worse today than it was before.
What is worse? I mean, it's not like Donald Trump invented climate change. Climate change will happen. It will continue to happen. Perhaps America will not be a leader in climate change research over the next 4 years, or 8 if the Democratic Party doesn't get its act together. Scary thought for some of you, I know. But the fact is that other governments, European governments, others are going to continue their push forward on climate change, and I have confidence that all the climate change scientists that exist in the world will prevail. You know, for example, abortion rights, you know, and U.S. funding for Planned Parenthood and these other organizations. The shift that happened after Donald Trump came to office from, you know, defunding and other, those are the politics of the Republicans. It's not like this tyrant came to the office now who hates women. This is just the politics of the Republicans. And yes, I did make a compromise on my own political sort of values in go ahead in accepting an administration that was going to remove that kind of funding. But ultimately, European governments kick in, the UN kicks in, other private donors like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation kicks in to make sure those kind of services continue out there in the world. So it isn't this doomsday that the left and others argue has happened over almost a year now.
So this is where the moderator's job gets incredibly difficult. To be fair, I think that the point he was making was that it's worse, not that it's necessarily doomsday. I mean, he pointed out that he doesn't accept that rhetoric. But what's showing up in the news, and I find it interesting that this is turned into I guess, a discussion about the new administration, is you guys have at least some agreement that both the left and the right are screwing up. I think his point is that the right is screwing up more, and I'm not sure that yours is even that the left is screwing up more, but that you felt a need to shake things up because the status quo wasn't working. Is that kind of accurate?
I think the left is screwing up more, and I think that we do have a difference of opinion on that, because your argument earlier was that, you know, the right does not have it correct on the issue of Islamic extremism, that they are motivated by hate and that they are motivated by religious war and politics. But I find, in fact, that the conservative community and the right actually understands in a more nuanced way the challenge that Muslims and Islamic organizations and Muslim reformers face. They have been educated by individuals like Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, a Muslim reformer, who is a conservative and a Republican, so that they have made a shift from the beginning of the Bush administration to today, where they are not, they've gone past the Islam is fill in the blank, a war a religion of war, and come to a place of more nuanced understanding. But unfortunately, too many people on the left still don't accept the idea that I believe that they have even a deeper moral duty to issues of women's rights and gay rights and atheist rights and secular rights, because this is their platform, and I feel in that way they are failing their own values.
And it seemed like you guys shared those values, though, which is a point of confusion, which I promise I'm going to get to in a question, because I've heard liberalism, feminism, secularism from both of you. And if we set aside the issue momentarily of which side's doing worse with respect to the issue of how do we deal with Islam, and we'll talk about reform probably in a minute as well. But if those are the values that you have, I'm wondering, it seems like, and I've heard this from other people, it almost seems like the left, which generally shares or should share the values that I have, has screwed up so bad that I'm going to go this other direction in the hope that they pay attention and change and fix their, is that close to?
Yeah, and it's not even a hope, because ultimately they are paying more attention. You know, it turned my stomach, trust me, when President Trump did the sword dance in Saudi Arabia. But 6 months later, in a reform that no Democratic administration and President Obama was not able to convince the Saudi regime to do, they are giving women the right to drive. And so somehow in the art of the deal, President Trump has figured out how to negotiate with the Saudis, because they are the exporters of the worst interpretation of Islam. And he figured out a change that we have not been able to persuade them to do under any democratic administration that should have shared those values. And I trust that, I believe any day now, not that I have any inside story, but my political instinct tells me that Saudi Arabia will free the blogger that has been in jail and whipped for so many years.
So I want to give you a chance to...
Yeah, I mean, I just want to probably speak again about this, is that I do think that conservatives get Islamic extremism. But what I do think is that they're getting it for the wrong reasons. So, and the same issue, for example, with free speech. I mean, free speech, generally speaking, most of the people who want to censor me or coming to campuses actually come from left-leaning people. So like the right also gets the free speech, but they also, when Trump does it, so they're like, they speak against Berkeley, they speak against what's happening like Milo and all of these people, but when Trump is talking about NFL and trying to tell the NFL what to do, the right is absent. So they get the free speech right also for the, correct? So they get two things right for the wrong reasons. So I mean, they're kind of like, I always support a free speech when it comes to my people. And I support the fight against Islamic extremism because it's against my people. So they're not, I think I mean, if you look at the rights in America in general, I mean, there are many schools of the right, obviously don't want to generalize, but so those who are the nuanced, which I think that makes up from the neoconservatism to the neoliberals in the Republican Party, they have lost this election, and they have lost to a more anti-globalist kind of bigoted rhetoric, which is come from Trump. Obviously, there are some people on the right, like John McCain and Marco Rubio and Senator Kirk, who actually might get it, and they might get it from a very nuanced way. But Trump does not. And also, when it comes to the Saudis, and working and analyzing Saudi media and many of these things, is that one of the reasons why Saudis are also cozying up to Trump is that because they see him a better candidate to fight against Iran. So because they think that Obama administration, and that's a very controversial subject, but Obama administration betrayed them by making the Iran deal. And then they see, and they think Iran is the biggest enemy in the region. So, and the same for UAE and Qatar and all of these Gulf countries. So they see Trump, he said he's going to cancel the Iran deal. He's going to probably wage a war against them, find a way in attacking them in multiple ways. They're like, oh, there's this guy who is going to fight against Iran. And let's use the United States in a way as a proxy against Iran. And let's buy more arms cells from the United States. So that's the reason why Saudi Arabia might like Trump more. That's not because he was tough on Islamic extremism, but they see him as a better ally in fighting against Iran.
Yeah, but that's the
and you agree with that, right?
That's the art of the deal. Like, he figured out what they want, what they need. What else did they have? This is like such a pivotal issue about why is Islamic extremism got such a stranglehold on our Muslim community. It's because two governments, and then Iran, fund it. And one of them, of course, we know is Saudi Arabia. Iran funds Shia extremism, and then the country of Qatar, right? As you well know, we've spent many hours over a beer, because I'm a Muslim reformer, talking about the dangers of the government of Qatar. And so Trump tapped into the rivalry that Saudi Arabia has got with Qatar, and for the first time, we see TV ads outing Qatar for its extremism in the world. And sure, it's politics, and it's opportunistic, but somehow he also convinced the government of Saudi Arabia to allow a jet, Air Force One, to fly from Saudi Arabian airspace to Israel. That hasn't happened since the 7th century, when a mythical horse named Al-Barak took the Prophet Muhammad from the mosque in Mecca to Jerusalem. That's the art of the deal, and it doesn't look pretty. I get the controversies. I used to cover corporate America. I know that this turns our stomach. You know, we're all ordinary people in this theater. We're not millionaires and billionaires for the most part, swindling others and things like this. And we don't connect with the Wall Street elite crowd. So don't believe that I think that, oh yeah, this is the culture that I think we should uphold in this country. But these guys know how to cut deals that seem impossible, and I'm pretty certain that if this administration is able to persist and is not driven out of office by the hashtag resistance, we will actually find peace in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine.
So for clarity, because I'm a little confused on this, are you agreeing with Faisal saying that Faisal's reasons why Saudi Arabia went along with this, that they view the United States as potentially invoking a war with Iran, and that's to their benefit, that was the deal?
Yes, I agree, but I say that what he did is he figured out what they want. What do they need at the table?
Is it a good thing that somebody figures out that a country wants a war, and then you go along with it so that women can drive?
We're not going to go to war with Iran. I'm certain of it. The nuclear deal was a complete sellout to the government of Iran. It was supported by an Iranian lobby in the United States, including the Muslim apologist, quote unquote, scholar Reza Aslan, who is allied with the anti-Trump movement right now. But ultimately, we have to put pressure on Iran. Iran is a theocracy. Every single one of us should be opposed to their state of government. They deny women equal rights. They deny secularists' rights. They deny atheists' rights. They deny anybody these fundamental values that we talked about towards the Age of Enlightenment or personal liberties. And so as a nation, we will compromise our values if we don't actually stand up against a government like that.
I want to give you a chance to respond, and then I think we'll probably move on to talking about reforming a bit, maybe what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I did not make up that Trump would want to make a war from Iran. It came from his AIPAC speech, the American-Israel Political Action Committee, and he was giving a speech, and that's one of the reasons why many religious or right-wing Jews voted for Trump, on the hope that he will do something against Iran, including a war. And then also, I mean, back to the Saudi-Israel alliance, I mean, this alliance has been going on for a long time, including under the Obama administration. There has been many meetings happened in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, in which the Saudis met with the Israeli officials, because again, the biggest enemy for Saudi Arabia is Iran. And Saudi Arabia, as a royal family, they are far more pragmatists than the Saudi society. So they are really ready to work a deal with Israel, and they've always done. I mean, because the enemy, I mean, even there has been some leaks that the Saudis said that they would allow Israel, they would give them the airspace to attack Iran. And that happened like 3-4 years ago under the Obama administration, which they told them like, okay guys, we might hate the Jews, but the Iranians, the Shias are worse. So, I mean, this is mostly regional adversaries who, I mean, and speaking again about Saudi Arabia, so like the royal family might make the deals with the Israelis, but their education system, which teach about hatreding of the Jews and the apostates and the atheists, has not been changed under Trump. I mean, it's this. I mean, Saudi Arabia will continue to be a funder of extremism of the people who want to kill us, whether they work Israel they work a deal with Israel or not.
I believe that I have called for a boycott. You want to go to change.org? Go sign my boycott Saudi Arabia.
And I support that, by the way.
Donald Trump didn't listen to me, right? And he went ahead and did the sword dance, but I understood why. And ultimately, Saudi Arabia will have to eliminate its extremist ideology. It will. There is no, and the young heir apparent, I believe, is ideologically with us on issues of reform. There is no way that a country like Saudi Arabia can continue through the 21st century with its antiquated medieval ideas. And they will be defeated if I have anything to do with it. And it will be eliminated from this earth. And the pressure is on. The economy, the demands on their economy are going to force them to integrate with the rest of the world. They cannot continue to live their little fiefdom and practice these just barbaric interpretations of Islam. And so I believe this kind of pressure will ultimately force the government of Saudi Arabia to liberalize. And we need that.
That's a good segue into talking about the reform. I'm going to start with you anyway, so you can address this. One of the things is, we talk about reform, the Protestant Reformation within Christianity. You could argue that maybe it changed it, maybe it softened it, maybe it released the church's stranglehold on stuff and gave individuals, and yet we still have tons of problems, and actually I would argue that a good many of our problems come more from the Protestant end of things. Catholics are okay with evolution, and they're not that big with condoms, but
But they'll accept it if.
But and again, what would, and I'll start with Faisal, is what would Islamic reform look like? How likely is it, and how do you even begin moving towards reform if many of the regimes that are Islamic are just going to kill dissidents?
Yeah, I mean, I just start with like just a small response to that. I mean, I'm not as hopeful about Saudi Arabia as Asra is. I mean, I think that now with the Iranian expansionism rhetoric coming from Al Jazeera and Arabia, I think the Sunni extremism would rise, funded by Saudi Arabia, to fight against Iran. But I wish you are right. I really wish that Saudi Arabia would liberalize, and maybe that last thing is as for Islamic reform. I mean, I grew up in a liberal Muslim family, and the way I was raised was, here is the books, you read the Quran, you read the Torah, you read the Bible, you make up your mind, you want to be a Muslim, be a Muslim, you want to be a Muslim, don't be a Muslim. That's why I'm not an ex-Muslim. I can talk about my exes as in girlfriends, but I'm not an ex-Muslim. So I think, I mean, a number one step is taking literalism away from Islam. I mean, when people, I think many of the issues we have with Islamic extremism or Islamic orthodoxy is that people look at the Quran as the literal word of God. And the moment you move that needle to it's inspired by God, or there are some contradictions we need to figure out, allows the room for critical thinking. And now, and the thing is, like, I think many Muslims, any Muslim who is not extremist or a member of ISIS is actually following Islamic reform. But what Asra and I think what people like Majid are trying to do is just ask them to reform one step further. I mean, every Muslim who is probably drinking alcohol or doing things or eating bacon or is already following some form of Islamic reform. So I think it is possible. I mean, we're seeing it right now. I mean, many moderate Muslims and liberal Muslims, and I mean, some countries are better than others when it comes to that. But I think it's like the moment they take the interpretation, like the literal interpretation away, and the moment there be more examination of Bukhari hadith, which many have a lot of extremist material, I think that is possible. Is that take literalism away, and I think that will open the gateway for critical thinking within Islam that allows more Muslims to examine religion further. And what else I want to say? I mean, yeah, I mean, I've been a very big supporter of Asra and Majid and others, because I mean, I think that it's also very implausible to get rid of all religions. I think there is an inclination of many people who want to be religious and want to be spiritual and all of these things. And I think that if they're going to have a benign interpretation that allows them to coexist, allows them to, I mean, at the end of the day, people have the right to believe whatever they want. And I think that I don't want to take something that name it, because for me, I've never been religious. I don't really see any value for religion I don't even see the value of community. I mean, I go to bars for community. That's one of my place of finding community. But I think it's like, if people are needed, if they think it's a very important thing in their lives, then we better have a reformed, benign version than we have an orthodox, conservative version.
And so this is what the Muslim reform looks like. Faisal was able to emerge thinking whatever you want to think about the faith. I sit here before you, I have nail polish on my toes. My son, who's 14 now, is here in the audience with you all. I raise him as I raise him as a single mother. I feel the wind in my hair. I drive a car. And I think, critically, like, that is the power of everything that you all are about. That is why I sit before you, because each one of you has dared to challenge the conventional wisdom in your life. And that takes courage. That takes intellectual courage. That takes emotional courage. It takes a lot of emotional courage. And I really applaud all of you. It means leaving sometimes that which you were indoctrinated with to challenge the ideas that you will practice in the world. And that's what we're trying to do within our Muslim community. I find atheists very inspirational. I simply seek the same reformation within the atheist community that I try to find within my Muslim community, to moving towards a positive value, movement, to not ripping people apart, right? The kind of things that we've talked about earlier today.
I feel like we should pause and hug real quick.
I know. But we care about our world, I should say, and we have to exercise this thing called critical thinking. In Islam, we call it ijtihad. That's the word for critical thinking, and that is the thread through all of our conversations about the path forward for Islam.
So let's play a little game for the next few minutes, and I'm going to call this game, Let's Educate the Ignorant American. That's me, by the way. You may be too. Hopefully, there's some benefit here. People will often say that Islam is the single most dangerous ideology worldwide with respect to life, liberty, and freedom. Do you think that's generally fair as a broad assessment?
No, I think it's Mark Twain famously said, all generalizations are false, including this one.
Yeah.
And I think that whenever I hear someone says Islam is, I generally take a pause. Islam has multiple interpretations. That's why you see there are civil wars happening in the Middle East of people from different sects. So it's obvious that people, you can ask 6 Muslims what do they think Islam is, they might give you different answers. So, I think is that Orthodox Islam is, at the 21st century, represents more danger than other religions, and because it's the only religion that has not been reformed, and the Enlightenment movement is not as strong as it is with Christianity and Judaism. So I think if someone adds like Orthodox Islam or Wahhabi Islam, yes, that is a problem. Salafi Islam is a problem. But I think is that if you're talking about Reformed Islam or moderate Islam or Sufi Islam, then no. I think is that this statement is false if somebody just say Islam, because Islam differs. It belongs to a spectrum from radical to moderate or cultural, and Islam the interpretation of it can differ based upon the person. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is a sentiment that I have heard not only from far-right Republicans, as you were trying to describe, but from the atheist community. There is an argument that people make that in a rejection of religion, it is then, in the case of Islam, a rejection of an ideology of hate, sexism, misogyny, homophobia. And the mistake that occurs then in that analysis is that you don't allow for this kind of continuum that Faisal is talking about. So my little Islam 101 is simply that this was a religion born in the 7th century with a Quran that was a sacred text and these traditions of the Prophet Muhammad called the Hadith that then became the fundamentals for Sharia or Islamic law. And over the centuries then, we had hundreds of madhabs or schools of law. And one of the most enlightened ones was in your home country. No coincidence that Faisal then is born out of that culture. It was called the Mu'tazilites, like I mentioned before. But in the 10th century, the Mu'tazilites were killed and slaughtered because the rigid thinkers considered them a threat, which they were. And that was when the gates of ijtihad were closed. And so through the next centuries, as the West went through its enlightenment, we closed in on 8 surviving schools of law in our Sunni Islam. My family comes from India, which is the Hanafi madhab. the Saudis come from the Hanbali madhab, and from Hanbali Islam comes the Wahhabis. And so these are schools, you know, intellectual schools. So our Muslim Reform movement is saying these man-made, literally they're man-made schools, because every one of them is named for a man, are not compatible with the 21st century. Because they say that you, as a woman, are equal, that it's going to take both of us, you and me, to equal one man as a witness.
Sure, they weren't just like talking about general size and bone density, muscles, yeah.
Intellect, right? And we for all of the jokes earlier, we reject that notion. And that is where I hope you will allow us space, you know, to thrive and succeed, because when we succeed, you thrive and you succeed, because your decision, many of you in this room, decision to question your faiths into which you were born, to question faith alone, to criticize, we accept, we enjoy, we want to have happen.
So my joke actually wasn't just a joke, it had a purpose. I think we're kind of in agreement that you can't speak broadly about Islam and generalizations in the same, you know, you couldn't do it with Christianity either, even though we do. And we go further, we will talk about religion as if it's one thing. But the joke part of this comes down to fights over orthodoxy and interpretation. And I've pointed out to people, you know, you don't have to know anything at all about the Bible. If somebody's going to come up and tell you why you should believe in Jesus, they're presenting a case. And you are in a position where all you really have to do is ask questions, and they are responsible for explaining. When I've tried to have similar conversations, and I talked to Mohammed Syed about this just the other week when he was on the show.
So he's an atheist,
yes.
Muslim.
The president, co-president of Ex-Muslims of North America, president, CEO, head honcho, whatever.
Drug dealer.
No,
that's a joke. That's a joke.
When we talk about the interpretations, it keeps coming back to everybody thinks they have the correct interpretation. There are groups, and this is true within Christianity and Islam as well, that are not only is my interpretation correct, but I will not tolerate any potential dissent from it, which makes it incredibly difficult to start implementing reforms. I know it's a lengthy process, and you change the world around the intractable minds, and you work along these lines. And I promise this is not intended to just be glib, but for me, hearing about reform as an atheist, as a former Christian, my primary concern is whether or not the foundational premises of the religion are true. And so it's like saying, should we reform young earth creationism in order to get to day age creationism, or should we reform flat earth ideas? I appreciate the fact that a weaker, a less strict, a less literal version of Islam would certainly be preferable to what we often deal with in some of the groups. I still am not completely sure on, is this going to require military action for the regimes that won't allow dissent and censor information so you don't have access to the internet, that are killing atheist bloggers? Do we even focus in that area, or do we just try to change the world around them and hope that it seeps in over time?
I argue for a tough strategy with those countries, because I believe that their denial of human rights is unacceptable in our world. The things that they deny are just so abhorrent to me. The idea that a person cannot speak without fear of jail sentence or flogging. The fact that people can't make individual consensual adult decisions about issues of sex is so unacceptable. We made a decision as a nation, and mostly in the West, that the apartheid regime of South Africa was unacceptable anymore. And we boycotted those countries. We boycotted that country. We boycotted the economic engagement with South Africa. And we need to have the moral courage in this country, everyone, from the left to the right, to say that those kind of regimes and their control over their citizens is unacceptable. And that's where I know we're united in the middle to say no to those regimes, that they are unacceptable anymore, and we can't give them a pass. I understand earlier I was accepting diplomatic negotiations, but ultimately we have to be clear in our moral compass against those regimes.
Yeah, I mean, one of the jokes I get banned on Facebook because of, I said, if you don't like ISIS, join them because change comes from within.
Facebook doesn't have a sense of humor.
And I get banned for, I think, a month or 2 months. But I mean, I think that I think it's a war of information. I mean, what my organization is doing, we're trying to translate books from English to Arabic, scientific, skepticism, etc., etc. So the more we can, I mean, one of the benefits of the Iraq war, if there's any, is that now many Iraqis have access to smartphones. Many Saudis use Twitter a lot. Many Egyptians use YouTube a lot. Like, there are all these digital social media stuff that I think we need to wage a war of information towards the Muslim world. Get them multiple ideas. I mean, one of the things that really changed my mind, like before, was like the United States used to put radio stations on the Iraqi borders. That was after the first Gulf War, and they used to tell us all the counter narrative about Saddam Hussein, because like the ones we were taught was like the Jews led a war against Iraq with 30 countries and Saddam won. We won the Iraq war, and it used to be called the mother of all battles, right? But then they used to give us a counter narrative on this radio. Me and my dad used to go up in the roof and then put the radio and the antenna up at 2, 3 in the morning, and we get a counter narrative stories. I think we need to wage that war of information. Get them counter narratives. Oh, do you know about the theory of evolution? Or do you know that science and the Big Bang and all of these things?
Right.
The more, because many of these people are not being taught these things. I mean, Iraq, unfortunately, my home country, is that now they're not allowing evolution to be taught. We used to have just 2 pages talking about evolution. Now it's removed.
Yeah.
Turkey is removing that. And so we need, like, use this power of technology, launch a war of information and provide the people there with a spectrum of views to the way. I mean, I think that skepticism and being allowed to hear multiple views is the biggest enemy of dogmatism.
Right.
The more people know that there are multiple things, somebody should not like have a clear thinking, see the benefit, advantages, disadvantages of other ideas. The more we can do that, and the more we can introduce these ideas to the Muslim world, I think the better.
And I would just add to that this power rests in each one of our hands, literally at the tips of our fingers, in the engagements that we make, in even the safety of America. We can connect to people overseas in countries where this exposure to these ideas is not safe to have. You can't have the conversations with your family members or at the university. You're a magician? That's what they claim, right?
Yeah.
You are a criminal in the government of Saudi Arabia.
For doing that?
Yep. You're a criminal. You connect to those magicians. You know there's a few in Saudi Arabia. And I, as a feminist, connect to the women in Iran that are taking off their scarves on White Wednesday. You connect to the bloggers in Bangladesh and Egypt. And I cannot even begin to tell you that you follow one of them, and it just lights up their life. You know how discouraging this work can be. You know how difficult it can be. Otherwise, why would you all come into Milwaukee, right? To be with kindred spirits. You need kindred spirits. And those fighting within Muslim communities need them. So your extension of friendship is in itself a great gift to others.
So in my continuing education, and we're just a few minutes from lining up for questions, talking about this war of information, everybody, even in countries that aren't censoring your access to stuff, has this difficulty of figuring out who they should and shouldn't listen to. None of us have time to become experts in everything. And this process of picking and choosing who are going to be your authorities is, I think, part of the problem with regard to confusion. There's a story that I've been told and talked to others We were watching The New Cosmos with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and in episode 5 he was talking about how the Muslim world, the Arabic world at large, was at the forefront of science and education and books, and learned people would come from all over. And I knew the story, and so I reached over and I grabbed my wife's wrist. I was like, watch this. They're going to nail this. And then they just kind of skipped on to the next thing. And I had the opportunity to talk to Neil about this at a PostCon a couple years ago, because the continuation of the story is that an imam basically announced that mathematics was the purview of God. And this fundamentally changed and essentially set a lot of the Arabic world in a sort of backward state, where now instead of being at the forefront, they start to match up and then they start to decline. And that's why you have, more computers and access and stuff in the West and greater standing. How is this, in the countries that are engaging in this control over information, if that story's not known, wouldn't that be just about the best story you could get into somebody's hands to say, we used to be the best, here are the facts, and what we've done on behalf of a particular religious interpretation is set us back and look at what's actually going on in the West? Wouldn't that, how much impact could something like that have as far as waking people up to?
It'll either motivate them or it'll get you killed. Because
oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm glad it was my idea then.
Because what is it? It's shaming, right? It ultimately, one of the fundamental problems we have in our Muslim community is that we are still tribal, and everything that you all talked about today in terms of the tribalism in the atheist community reminded me of the dynamic we always experience in our Muslim community. We are tribal. We engage in honor and shame. What is trolling doing but shaming? And if you tell Muslims many times, oh, you had this great golden age, because, the time has come. Because do you know how to say algebra? It's algebra, right? Because it was an Arabic word, and this is...
And so is alcohol.
Alcohol.
That's the reason I'm alcoholic.
So,
but not Al Gore.
But what you are absolutely right, that we have to inspire, though. We have to get it so that we will make other Muslims say that if you will actually honor Islam by asking difficult questions, like why aren't you leaders now in mathematics when you once were, and that we would actually uplift our community if we ask these difficult questions.
Yeah, I think that this story is used a lot by Arab nationalists as well, is that we used to be this, and it works, but also I think it has negative impact, because what we also used to be is that we conquered almost half the planet, right? So Arabs are smart sometimes. So, going back to the history, ISIS, for example, is trying to recreate the caliphate. This belonging to the past and trying to recreate the past might have the benefits of being scientifically developed, but at the same time, it also means expansionism and occupation. And there are people who are still longing for the fact that Spain, or southern Spain at least, belongs to us. Like, there are people who still believe that southern Spain, that we conquered them and it's our land. So I think is that teaching history, at least real history, with more nuance, that, okay, you can take the science part, which was good, but don't take the conquering part, which was bad, would be very necessary. Because I think just talking people about the past and trying to create the past, the history is complicated, right? There are multiple books. There are 2 books that I might recommend. There's one called The Crisis of Islam by Bernard Lewis. The other one's called What Went Wrong, which is actually talks about the scientific revolution. I actually corrected Neil deGrasse Tyson. I was lecturing him in a PostCon about how he got some of these things wrong. But yes, I think is that teaching the history in a more nuanced way and telling them the good parts and the bad parts might actually revive a better thing than if you just teach them the past as it is, because it has some bad aspects as well.
On that note, you can start lining up for questions. I thought I was in charge of this damn thing, and you let them line up for. Okay, I have to say my goodbyes. The conversation is going to continue. I'm sure that your questions will be better than mine, because you know what you want to hear, and I got to ask what I wanted to hear. Thanks everybody for having me out. Please ask good questions. And I'm off to London. Thank you, Ashley. Pleasure.
I appreciate it.
See you.
Matt,
I will help you.
have a safe flight.
Fun.
Allahu
Thank you
Akbar.
so much.
get
Can we
over here.
do another round for Matt? I mean, that was civil discourse, right?
Actually, should we hug after the debate?
What was that?
We're still not
You want a
done.
hug?
Oh, so really? Oh, shit.
Okay, perfect.
Because I
Well,
think it's
we
like-
already have
But
people
we
queued
will.
up, which is perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that you guys seen that it's very important to have civil conversation, and that's actually one of the things that we wanted to have before we discussed it before the debate. Is that I don't know if I call it a debate; it's more of a conversation. I mean, you looked at the past debate, and it looked more like a shouting match. So I hope that you guys like this more, in which people can actually agree to disagree. And
Oh, thank you. And
yeah, we definitely need more of that, I think. Yeah.
And I would just like to say that, you know, for what I argued about politics, ultimately, I haven't gotten the phone call from the White House, you know, to bring the Muslim reform movement in the front door. This change is going to depend on us, each one of us individually, and we cannot leave it in the hands of politicians on any side to get it right. And so we as constituents and citizens of this world have to stand up for the values that we care about. And I really also thank you all for being here.
That's a perfect segue to questions, so take it away.
Hi. I've got to pick on Asla for a second because you voted for Trump. Okay. I apologize. You had that right. But, well, one of his main campaign promises was that he wanted to repeal Obamacare. And while it is by no means perfect, I'm not going to argue that, millions of people do now have access to health insurance and ultimately health care. And the only reason I have health insurance now is because my job is now legally required to provide it for me because of Obamacare. And so my question for you would be, do you feel that every American citizen does have the right to health care? Why or why not? And if you do feel that every citizen has the right to health care, how do you kind of reconcile that with your vote for Trump?
Well, I do wish for every citizen of our world to have access to health care. It's a crisis. I can tell you as a self-employed person, I didn't have health care during the Obama administration, during Obamacare, and I don't have it now. The Obamacare solution priced me out. And I respect and wish health care for everybody like yourself who was able to get it, and would never wish for it to be abandoned under any new solution. But what I saw by both parties were lackluster solutions, and ultimately where I saw the difference was on this issue of Islamic extremism, and so cast my vote as I did. But we certainly have not figured it out. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian. I don't really have a serious question, more of a curious question about the Muslim religion. As a Christian, it's kind of a taboo for someone to be named Jesus or even Jesus. Do you know why it would be acceptable for people to be named Muhammad under the Muslim religion?
It's a taboo in Christianity to be called Jesus?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, all my Mexican friends are called Jesus.
Yeah. But anyway, let's just, to your point, let's just, despite that, because in Islam, like I was talking about, the hadith is the traditions and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. So anything that a Muslim does that emulates the Prophet Muhammad is considered valuable and worthy. And so assigning your child his name is a symbol of honor then. And so I guess in a way it's just a different interpretation about, you know, what is honorable.
Yeah.
Protestant Christians, by the way, not Catholics, but Protestant Christians.
Oh. Yeah, I see.
Okay, so
I see why
Protestant
Mexicans
Christians,
have no problem.
so there we have a differentiation of interpretation within Christianity.
Hey, so do you think that Islam's initial spread through conquest, you know, the Rashidun Caliphate, sort of set the precedent for instability? Because I think there was a decent amount of like syncretism in the beginning with like Yazdanism and Zoroastrianism. So did that set the precedent for like all the different sects kind of like warring with each other?
Interesting.
I think it's like, the two major religions, Christianity and Islam, both had to, used force. You wouldn't know about Christianity today without Constantine. Constantine making Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, using force somehow to achieve it, was essential to the spread of Christianity. It's still the biggest religion in the world. And also, Islam and Christianity, what they have in common is that they both see themselves as universal religions. So they think that everyone should be Christian, everyone should be Muslim, at least from the Orthodox side. So, yes, I'm not in favor of using force to spread any religion, but I think it was coming from this mentality. And some of it is actually also, now I'm reading more about the subject, some of it is also economical. There's this quote, I don't know if it's 100% accurate, and they asked like Harun al-Rashid, who used to be the caliph in the Abbasid regime, and not regime, the empire, saying that why is Baghdad at the time used to be more developed in so many schools, and he said like, how do you have that? He said, well, we as Arabs have more time to do science and reason, while we bring the others, meaning people from India and Indonesia, to do the low-paying jobs. So we Arabs used to have more time. So there's a reason for conquering these parts of the world. Well, some of it was economic reasons, that get cheap labor, and while Arabs, we can do more and steal the resources of the other countries and use it for our own benefit. Some of it is a mix of economics, so it's not necessarily religiously motivated, but it's also economic as well.
Just part of that question was also about the phenomena. I can never say the word right because it's a super smart word. Syncretism. What is the word? How do you say it again?
Syncretizing religion.
So that means when you adapt local cultures. And so I'm from India, and my family converted from Hinduism to Islam through the Sufis that came from the north. And thus, my grandmother wore the sari, which is usually a typical symbol of Hinduism. And when my aunties moved to Pakistan, they sold their saris, unfortunately, in you know how we have bake sales in America? It was a sari sale for the militants. So, unfortunately, what happened is the Saudi interpretation then wants to say that adaptation of Hindu traditions, local traditions in other countries in Africa, adulterate the language, the religion, and that you have to practice Saudi Islam to be a pure Muslim. And so they do use that as an ideological, intellectual intimidation against us, so that we then feel like we're lesser than as Muslims, and that we have to practice their strict interpretation. And so that different cultural expression of Islam throughout the world is an opportunity that they use to try to indoctrinate us.
And try to make the Muslim world more homogeneous.
Yeah, to their point of view.
To their point of view.
So like I wear a hand of Fatima, or a Hamza, you could call it, bought in Jerusalem, because I got to cover all my bases. And it's to protect me from the evil eye, right? So don't think about trying anyone out there. And the Saudis would say that they would rip this off my neck because they would consider it an amulet that is black magic.
Thank you very much for that debate. It was really interesting. My question is kind of two-part. The first part is meant mainly for Faisal, and I say this as also a Christian, a person who's religious myself. I find the idea of reforming a religion to be very weird, especially for someone like you who is not religious, because you understand that the value of a religion for religious people is that it is a set of values that stays constant throughout time. So in that sense, I find reforming to kind of catch it up with where we are now to be really counter what religion fundamentally is, which is why I think what Matt said was more kind of like intellectually logical and honest in that he simply does not find value in religion at all. And then to kind of go along with this, yeah, so the second part for both of you, which is I was very surprised to hear like the idea of like military action even come up, and it really demonstrates why I'm against like universal human rights and this kind of universalism, because it sounds almost like you two are simply have your own absolutist moral code that you want so badly to be followed by the rest of the world, including like the repressive, regressive regimes in the Middle East, that you might actually consider military action, or that the US should have some kind of role in forcing change on these cultures. So I know that's complicated, but if you both could just comment on that.
Yeah, on the second point, I would just say that I definitely would never be an advocate for military action, despite how fiercely I embrace certain values, just because I'm not that way. But ultimately, I do not think that expecting or putting up a standard of human rights is a violent act upon the world. To your first point, I would just say that in my case, for example, you know, everything reforms. To believe that religion is untouchable at one point in life or in history is an illusion of itself, I would argue. And if we ever believe, if we love America and we think that America should never have changed, we wouldn't have progress. And so to me, reform is just a synonym for progress.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at religion, I mean, religion is a human institution, right? And religion evolves over time. There is like the Islam, the Christianity we have today is far different than the Christianity that was existing after, like, with the Roman Empire. The same with Islam. I mean, it's a human institution that changes over time. Sometimes it becomes more progressive, sometimes it becomes more conservative. So I don't believe that religion is something that never changes and stays. Religion always changes. I mean, it's a human institution that the same way that political ideologies are. They also change and adapt. In China, for example, how the China started before, like with the Communist Revolution, and China today is not the same thing. So, like, because there's also a human institution. So human institutions change. I mean, I never claim that I am myself a Muslim reformer. I mean, I'm not a Muslim, but I would like to see it happen. I mean, it's something that I support. It's something that I already see happening with many religious moderates who don't. And I'm a strong believer in freedom of religion. I don't believe that in freedom of religion. And I believe that if people find religion is meaningful to them, then they have every right to have this religion, as long as they don't fucking kill me, right? They don't impose theocracy. They don't tell me what to do. I mean, I think in the Quran it says, "Lakum dinakum waliya din," which is, your religion is yours and my religion is mine. I support that principle. If you think religion is good for you, just don't impose it on myself. So, and I see that this efforts of reform will achieve that goal.
Hello.
Hello.
I have a question as an atheist about the Muslim perspective on Jesus Christ, and I find it a very interesting thing because some atheists in the community question even if he actually was a person or if he was a myth, and the Muslim perspective on it I think would be very valuable.
Yes, I'm just going to
the name for Jesus in Arabic. Oh, his mic is on.
He's about to be right back. He just needed to go to the restroom, but he'll be right back.
Okay, I hope he turns his mic off.
Yeah, that would be.
Because we don't need to
I'll take
know,
care
right?
of that.
We love him, but so the name for Jesus is Isa. in Arabic, and you will know a Pakistani Christian, for example, because oftentimes they take the name Isa. So to your earlier point, even in Islam, they will take then the name of Isa. My son's first name is Shibli, and then his middle name is Daniel, which is a variation of Daniel. And so, like Jesus, Islam accepts all of the prophets of the Old Testament and Jesus. And so the departure, and this is where the Muslim apologists, for lack of a better word, will, I think, try to fool people at their little interfaith potluck dinners, is they say, we all have the same feeling about Jesus, but the truth is that Christianity has moved into a belief in the Trinity for the most part. There are non-Trinitarians. And many people in atheism, I know, were turned off to Christianity because of the belief in the Trinity. And you will be similar to Muslims, more similar to Muslims than who do not have a belief system in the Trinity and do not believe in the deification of Jesus as the Son of God. And so in Islam, we are taught that Jesus existed historically. And I went to Jordan, and I went to every place that Moses has been buried, and there are a few of them. And so I promise you it's true. I know it is. What did you say? He got around. Yes, he did, exactly. So, you know, I love... Good. Now you can put the mic back on.
Yeah.
I love
Sorry, I had so many beers last night, so...
I love the name of this conference because what is mythology, right? Where does religion, where does fact separate from mythology, to your point? One of the first words I taught my son was mythology, because I think that you need to relate to the narrative of this world through that lens. And I would just say that what's so important, even if you don't believe in the stories of others, is that they believe it, you know? And if we don't understand how other people believe their narratives and their stories, then we'll never be able to have the kind of critical conversations you were talking about. So Jesus has a very valued position, but I'll just end the answer, I'm sorry it's so long, with a story that's symbolic of, unfortunately, Muslim supremacy. So that's why I say if you stand up against white supremacy, please stand with us against Muslim supremacists, because what Islamic State is arguing is that the horses will come down through Iraq and Raqqa, with the black banners, and they will pray in the mosque in Damascus, and that's why they want Syria so badly. Their eschatology or end times vision is that this will happen. And in the corner of the mosque, then the Mahdi, or the Messiah of Islam, will come forward, and he will see Jesus, because Jesus will return to this earth, and that he will tell Jesus, you lead the prayer. And then in the Muslim supremacist version of the story, Jesus will say, no, you lead it. So thus giving Muslim supremacists the last word. And again, I don't believe any of it, but it's important for us to understand it, right? If we're going to understand ISIS's military action.
That's why, I mean, that's the reason why their magazine is called Dabak, which is, talk about the end of times.
That's going to be a key city that they
I'm not going to ask you to read it, because that would be advocating for violence, but it's worth checking, because it talks a lot about the end of times and Jesus stories too.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sorry. In terms of reforming the Islamic religion, especially Europe, we've seen a lot of problems come out of radical mosques and so-called no-go zones in places like Germany, UK, and Sweden. And I won't get into the detail of those just for the sake of time, but wouldn't it be much better if we focused on cleansing the radical mosques of our Western society before we moved on to the Eastern society and worked on those?
Well, I mean, I just came back. I went to Denmark about a month ago, and I spoke there with the government, and there's like a police car in front of every synagogue, which shows you the sign that there is extremism. I don't think the no-go zones are sometimes bullshit. It's not, doesn't really exist, but there's something like a no-go zone. I mean, this is a very big debate that I think all of us are having about freedom, right? So, are people allowed to preach hate? And where is hate speech and where is free speech? I mean, if you allow someone to say, well, white people are better than non-black, which is like white supremacy and white nationalism. If we allow that, should we mean we have to allow Muslim mosques who say Islam is a better religion than others? So like, I'm afraid that, especially if you give a government power in terms of cleaning things and canceling things, it's a slippery slope to authoritarianism. The moment that you give government power and choosing, this is the radical religion, this is not the good religion, this is the bad religion. So that being said, I think that some attempts of trying to, if that mosque, for example, in some countries in Europe, the mosque receive government funding, okay, because it's a more socialist, collectivist mentality. So I think that if you preach hate, whether you're a mosque, whether you're a synagogue or a church, government funding should not go for you. Whether you're a mosque or an Islamic school, taxpayers' money should not be used to fund hate. You can do it in your own private business. Thank you. You should do it. You can do it in your own private business, but there should be some standards of government funding. So,
and what does that government funding mean? That means, like, for example, this organization is a 501c3, and so you get tax benefit status. And so churches, mosques are 501c3 organizations, and they get a tax benefit. And I went to the Senate this summer with this argument, because you can't make this up, but there was a case called U.S. versus White against a white supremacist. He had a convenient last name. And he had a how-to guide where he was messaging how they should kill a judge who had ruled against another white supremacist. He did get sent to jail under criminal charges for inciting violence against that judge. And so on that same point, when I went to the Senate, I went with a book that I had gotten as an Amazon Prime member, delivered overnight to me, that was a how-to guide on how to beat your wife, according to Islam, right? All the many ways why we enjoy it and why we should be subordinate to the men. And this is back to the political discussion we had. The Republicans hosted that hearing, and they listened to what Ayaan Hirsi Ali and I had to say. But the Democratic senators, Senator Kamala Harris, who might run for president in 2020, and several other Democratic women senators, completely ignored us. You know, they didn't even look us in the eye. And so we care about this country, and so there's a continuum from those countries to the ideologies practiced in our mosques here, and that's why I argue that we have to care about what is done here, but also what's done over there, because there's a thread that connects it all.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. My question is for both or either of you. I'm an ex-Christian atheist, and I was a moderate Christian, and I still struggle with the idea of how moderate Christianity, or trying to moderate any religion, can give cover for the more fundamentalists. It can legitimize the fundamentalists. It can just make the debate more difficult because you keep moderating, and it makes it hard to discuss God if it keeps changing. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, and there is an argument that I think Sam Harris made before, that religious moderation creates a smokescreen for fundamentalism too. I mean, I think that it really depends on what you define as moderate. So, and unfortunately, when it comes to Islam, what is moderate, the standards are really low. Like, everyone who's not ISIS is now a moderate, which is, I don't think that's how it works. So I think that those Muslims who are actively engaging in fighting the radical ideology that exists within their own communities are not doing, they're not creating a cover for fundamentalism, they are fighting it. And also, I think that, I mean, I wrote this article, is that how to differentiate between an Muslim bigot and Islam and critic of Islam, is that, I mean, I don't ask any Muslim to condemn the attack after a terrorist attack happens. I never do. But however, I don't want them to say this has nothing to do with Islam. I don't want them to be apologists and not take any responsibility. So that is where I draw the line between a moderate and an apologist. And a moderate is someone who engages in fighting that. I don't think they are creating any cover. They're fighting fundamentalism itself.
One of us will answer the question so that we can have all the questions.
Did I give a good answer in your?
It was perfect.
Okay, thank you.
So this question is for Asra, and I'm kind of up here asking this question on behalf of a friend of mine who can't be here. He's a gay Saudi Arabia man who's seeking asylum in the United States right now. And my question is this, and it has to do with your deal-making comment, because I think you have a double standard. On one hand, you criticize the left for essentially coalition building or deal-making with the likes of Linda Sarsour, who at worst is advocating for modesty culture and things like that. But then you justify Trump's deal-making with Saudi Arabia, who would have my friend killed if he went back there for being a gay man. I mean, how do you justify, or how can you reconcile the...
Trust me, I can't. I was, like I said earlier, sick to my stomach the weekend of the Saudi sword dance. Seeing our country, as we have done year after year, accept and have relation with that country is the greatest pain to me, because they are the exporter of this problem. We wouldn't need Muslim reform if the Saudis didn't have their interpretation. And so I simply have a lens in which I see this as the greatest pathway to the reform of his country, too, that will bring about the kind of end all that we all want. And if I can help your friend in any way, please know that my heart is with him.
I don't actually have much of a way of a question, but more like encouragement. I think both of you brought up very good points earlier, that you can't just solve this problem with bullets alone, that this is not a war of bombs, but a war of ideas. And that reformation is actually, as Matt Dillingham put it, preferable over to what we're dealing with now. So, and I know that, as we all know, history teaches us that large changes take time, and a lot of time. So, and it's, extremism is more like addiction, in a way. You have to go down in a step-by-step process until you've run it out entirely out of your system. And I hope that you two are able to change as many minds as possible to bring as many people towards a peaceful negotiation or coexistence. And I really enjoy the work you guys are doing right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really.
This is not. We'll only have time for one. This is probably going to be our last question, unfortunately. So.
Andy.
I really appreciate that the event organizers have made an effort to invite Muslim reformers to a conference of predominantly non-believers. When this effort was repeated earlier this summer in London, bringing together particularly ex-Muslims and Muslim reformers, it led to a lot of acrimonious debate that resulted in feelings being hurt. Particularly, I guess that's bound to happen when you bring together people who do, in the end, have very different worldviews. My question for both of you is, how do you, I think it's important to bring together people like you, but what would you like to, what is your message to atheists, non-believers, in order to, so that they don't isolate the few Muslim reformer allies that they do have?
Thank you, Andy. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I think the question that you ask is such an important one to all of us, not just the relationship between Muslims in the effort for reform, but also individuals within the atheist community and your own community. You know, we have heard through this weeks coming up and the days coming up and today, you know, so much of that kind of acrimonious debate between people. And I think that, you know, when the travel ban 1.0 was happening, Faisal and I are on opposite sides of the political decision, right, on what was best for the direction of our country. But the first thing that I did was message him and call him to find out how his life was, what was his condition, how was his mother, because I cared about him as a human being. And I think we can never underestimate like how we are all actually individual human beings, and in social media, we forget our humanity. And when you go into atheism, especially, the criticism of religion then becomes your cross to bear, not to have a terrible pun, when you forget the humanity of others. And so despite how intoxicating the latest Twitter battle can be, what I want to encourage is the kind of friendship that people can have despite different points of view. And that is how the values, too, of the Muslim Reform movement and also your values will prevail and survive and ultimately define our world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, I like the idea that the conference brought, I mean, I think that this conversation about Islamic extremism and Islam is literally the most important conversation of the 21st century. The 20th century, we dealt with Nazism and communism and fascism, even though some of it is coming back right now, but I mean, this century is defined by the Islamic extremism, unfortunately. I mean, I am considered one of the 9/11 generation, right? 9/11 happened and I was a teenager and I lived 2 wars as a result of that. So I think that like atheist conferences and should be more inclusive of people who talk about these conversations. I mean, this is very important conversation. I'm glad that we are able to do the civil way, and I think it should be always the way. So yeah, I think like this conversation needs to be had more, and I hope today we demonstrated a good role model for people to follow.
I can't think of a better way to end this conversation with those words of positivity. So let's give another round of applause for our amazing debaters.
Woohoo! Okay, ready? So, champion!
So we're going to be off until 6:30, but that is when